Hello, and welcome to another cozy mystery here on The Curious Case. I'm your host, Davis, and I'm glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? And how was your day? I always love reading your answers. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe for tomorrow's mystery. Now, settle in, relax, and let's begin tonight's tale. Miss Marple stepped off the small afternoon train. Hawthorne Edge. Quiet. Still. Too still. She held her handbag close. The station platform felt narrow, almost squeezed in. A cold gust slipped down the corridor behind her. Sharp. Unexpected. She paused. Another gust followed. Short. Quick. Like someone had opened a door and shut it fast. She looked around. No door had moved. No porter nearby. Just silence. And a faint ticking. Soft. Light. Repeating. She turned slightly. Another tick. Then another. And another. Different rhythms. Different speeds. Not one clock. Many. Dozens, maybe. All faint. All scattered. Miss Marple frowned. This was new. She had never arrived in a village where the first greeting was a wall of ticking. She adjusted her coat. Mrs. Alder had written 3 days ago. The note had been brief. Too brief. Do come, Jane. Something feels uneasy here. Nothing more. No explanation, no details. Just the word, uneasy. Miss Marple trusted that word. Mrs. Alder never exaggerated, and she never asked for company without reason. She stepped forward. Her shoes touched the cobbled path. The ticking followed her, soft at first, then slightly louder as she reached the station gate. A man crossed her path, tall, thin, carrying a wooden box under his arm. He didn't look at her, not even once, but the ticking grew louder when he walked by, as if the box itself held another clock. Miss Marple watched him turn the corner. He didn't slow, he didn't check behind him. He simply disappeared into the frosting, narrow lane. "Strange," she murmured. Another gust passed. Cold again, short again, almost identical to the first two. She noted it. She continued toward the village road. Hawthorne Edge lay ahead, small houses, quiet lanes, but something felt off. The stillness seemed forced, practiced, like people were trying to appear calm. She passed a shop window. Inside, a young woman stood frozen behind the counter. The woman saw Miss Marple watching. Her hand twitched. Her eyes darted toward the back room. Then she quickly looked away. Miss Marple kept walking. No need to confront anything yet. Observation first. Always observation. The ticking grew louder again, this time from behind a hedge, then from an upstairs window, then from a shed across the road. None. In sync. All competing. Too many clocks for one village. She reached the small lane that led to the Alders' cottage. A carriage passed her. The driver avoided eye contact, his hands shaking, his eyes fixed ahead. No greeting. The uneasiness in the letter. Yes. She could feel it now. A village holding its breath. She stepped closer to the cottage gate. The ticking faded here. Almost disappeared. But the cold gust returned. Once, twice, then stopped. Miss Marple placed her hand on the gate. Slow. Careful. The latch moved too easily. As if someone had opened it very recently. She looked at the house. No movement, no greeting. Curtains still. She took one breath, then another. She stepped inside the gate. Something shifted behind her. Quiet, small, purposeful. Miss Marple didn't turn. She only whispered, "I'm not alone, am I?" Mrs. Alder opened the door before Miss Marple could knock. Her hands were already twisting a handkerchief. Tight, nervous, unmistakable. "Jane, thank goodness." Her voice shook. Not from age, from worry. Miss Marple stepped inside. Warm room. Quiet room. But Mrs. Alder's eyes kept moving. Left. Right. Toward the hallway. Toward the window. Back again. "Come in, dear." Quickly. She shut the door fast. Too fast, as though shutting something out. Mr. Alder sat in the front room, straight back, cane beside him. Tap, tap, tap. Slow, firm taps on the floor. Not impatience, not habit, a defense mechanism. Miss Marple noticed his jaw tighten. He nodded politely but avoided warmth. A man holding something back. A worry, a fear, a secret. "Welcome, Miss Marple," he said. Flat tone, controlled tone. Too controlled. Then Lydia Reed appeared from the kitchen. Young, pale, eyes down, shoulders stiff. A small tremor in her hand as she placed the teacups on the table. She didn't greet Miss Marple, didn't even attempt to smile. She stared once, briefly, then looked at the floor again. "Lydia's been staying with us for a few months," Mrs. Alder whispered. Worry returned to her voice. "She's had a difficult time." Miss Marple simply nodded. Observation first. Questions later. Lydia stepped back toward the hallway. Her shoes barely made a sound, but her breathing did. Short. Uneven. As if she feared every door, every voice, every footstep. Tap, tap, tap. Mr. Alder's cane struck the floor again. Miss Marple looked at him. He wasn't looking at Lydia. He was watching the front door, like he expected someone to enter, or feared someone might. Mrs. Alder tried to steady her voice. "Tea? I thought it might help us all settle." Miss Marple agreed softly, but her eyes had already moved to the window. A shadow passed. Then the doorbell rang. Sharp. Single chime. Too quick to be casual. Too intentional to be friendly. Mrs. Alder froze. Her fingers tightened around the handkerchief. Mr. Alder's cane stopped tapping. Lydia stepped back into the hallway as if retreating from danger. Mrs. Alder opened the door slowly. Mr. Holt stood outside. The clockmaker, tall, lean, clothes dusted with brass filings, eyes sharper than expected. He didn't greet anyone. He just stared inside. Too long, too fixed, studying faces, studying reactions. "Afternoon," he muttered. Quiet tone, neutral tone. But his gaze held weight, heavy weight. He stepped 1 foot inside the doorway, then spoke a single line. "Time has been behaving strangely here." Mrs. Alder flinched. Mr. Alder gripped his cane. Lydia disappeared deeper into the hallway, and Holt kept staring at Miss Marple, as if measuring her, testing her, judging her. Miss Marple returned the look politely, calm, level, but she noted everything. The dust on his sleeve, the faint smell of oil, the quick twitch under his left eye, the stiffness in his jaw, and the slight tremor in his right hand. He stepped back outside without another word. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't explain himself. He simply turned and walked toward his shop. Straight line. No hesitation. The door closed. The room stayed silent. Mrs. Alder whispered, "He's been like that for days." Mr. Alder tapped his cane once. Hard. A warning. Not to Holt. To Miss Marple. Lydia peeked from the hallway. Fear in her eyes. Real fear. Miss Marple folded her gloves slowly. Calm. Thinking. Connecting. She whispered to herself, "Why did he react like that? And what exactly is he afraid of?" Miss Marple followed Mrs. Alder into the dining room. The atmosphere shifted immediately. Not loud, not chaotic, just wrong. Quiet in the wrong places, busy in the wrong places. Unsettled. The maid, Ruth, stood by the table. Her hands shook as she placed the cutlery. Knife on the wrong side. Fork at the top. Spoon facing the wrong direction. Ruth froze when she noticed Miss Marple watching. She quickly corrected one piece, but not all. She left the rest misplaced, as if afraid to stay near the table too long. "Mrs. Alder whispered, "She's been like this all week." Miss Marple nodded. Once. No judgment. Only observation. Ruth hurried out. Fast footsteps. Too fast for simple nerves. She nearly bumped into a chair near the door. A chair that Miss Marple noticed had been moved. Only by inches, but moved. The chair didn't match the room now. It faced the wrong direction, slightly turned, as if someone had used it recently, or stood on it, or moved it to reach something. Miss Marple paused, looked up. Nothing unusual on the wall, nothing on the shelves, but someone had moved that chair, recently, purposefully. She touched the backrest, warm. Someone had been sitting there, not long ago. Mrs. Alder tried to smile. It didn't reach her eyes. Everything has felt out of place lately. Miss Marple moved toward the corridor. A faint draught touched her cheek. Cold, unplanned. She followed it. It led to the back of the house. The narrow hallway, the servants' door, the pantry door, all still. Then she saw it. The back door, unlocked, just slightly, latch not fully in place. A thin gap showing daylight through the frame. Miss Marple touched the lock gently. Loose. Too loose. Someone had opened it. Recently. But no one had mentioned using it. Mrs. Alder gasped softly. "Oh dear. I locked that this morning." Miss Marple said nothing. She simply checked the floor. No mud, no footprints, just a faint scuff mark near the hinge. Small, light, but new. She stepped back from the door. Something else caught her eye. A glint on the mantel in the sitting room. A clock, small, brass frame, delicate hands. One problem. It was 20 minutes slow. Miss Marple leaned closer. The mechanism ticked unevenly, slipping, stuttering, like someone had tampered with it, or wound it incorrectly, or wound it deliberately wrong. Mrs. Alder whispered, "That clock has never been wrong, not once." Miss Marple tilted her head, watched the pendulum falter. Once, twice, then correct itself, then slip again. She said the words softly, under her breath, thoughtful, measured. How unusual, Miss Marple noticed. The ticking grew louder in the next room, not from the brass clock. Another one, deeper tone, slower rhythm. A clock she hadn't seen yet. Miss Marple followed the sound. Slow steps, quiet steps. The ticking stopped suddenly, cut off, not faded. Stopped, as if someone had placed a hand on the mechanism. She reached the doorway, looked inside, and froze. Someone stood behind the curtain, still, silent, watching her. Miss Marple did not move. The curtain shifted once, just once, then stilled. She waited, calm, silent, watching the fabric, watching the outline behind it. The outline did not move again. Mrs. Alder called from the hallway. The outline vanished at the sound. Quick, quiet, gone. Miss Marple stepped forward and pulled the curtain aside. Nothing, only a narrow gap leading to the kitchen. Whoever had stood there knew how to slip away fast. She entered the kitchen. The first thing she noticed was the window. Open. Not fully. Just enough for a hand to reach through. Just enough for someone to listen. Or pass something inside. Miss Marple touched the frame. Cold. Very cold. Cold from outside air, not inside. Someone had opened it from the outside recently. She looked at the latch. Not broken. Not forced. Simply lifted. Quietly lifted. She filed that away. Lydia stood at the counter, pouring tea into cups. Her hands trembled. Small tremors. Not from the heat. Not from work. From fear. The spoon clinked against the cup twice. Too sharp. Too startled. Miss Marple stepped closer. Lydia froze. Her eyes dropped to the floor. She whispered, "Sorry. I didn't hear you come in." Miss Marple said nothing. No need to rush. Lydia's hands revealed more than her words. The tray shook slightly as she placed the cups. Her breathing quickened when a draught passed through the open window. Her shoulders tensed. Her fingers tightened. Miss Marple moved her eyes to the back door. A scarf lay on the floor, folded badly, dropped, not placed. Dried mud clung to one corner. Thick mud. Not from the cottage garden, not from the paved lane, from somewhere else, somewhere rougher, somewhere someone had rushed through. Miss Marple lifted it gently. The mud crumbled slightly. fresh enough to leave marks, dry enough to fall apart. She turned to Lydia. "Is this yours?" Lydia's eyes widened. Her throat tightened. No, I don't go out the back door." Miss Marple watched her carefully. The tremor grew stronger. Lydia knew more, much more. But fear sealed her words. A smell drifted past Miss Marple. Faint, thin, barely there. Tobacco. She turned her head toward the pantry. The smell lingered near the doorframe. Not fresh smoke, lingering smoke, the kind carried in on someone's clothes. She looked at Mrs. Alder. "I thought Mr. Alder doesn't smoke?" "He doesn't," she replied quickly. "No one in this house smokes." Then the question formed. Clear, simple, logical. If no one smoked, who brought the smell in? Miss Marple stepped closer to the pantry door. The smell grew slightly stronger ahead of her. Someone had stood here. Recently. Someone who didn't belong in a smoke-free house. Before she could open it, she heard it. A whisper. Soft. Short. Urgent. It came from the hallway. 2 voices. Low murmurs. Fast. Then Miss Marple stepped into the doorway. The whisper stopped instantly. Cut off. Not lowered. Stopped. She turned her head. She wasn't alone in the hallway. Someone stood at the far end. Still. Watching her quietly. Half hidden in the shadow. Someone who didn't want her hearing another word. Dinner was set quietly. No chatter. No comfort. Only careful movements. Only controlled breathing. Miss Marple sat near the center of the table. Perfect view of everyone. Perfect view of everything. Mrs. Alder served soup. Her hands were steadier now, but her eyes weren't. They kept drifting toward the hallway, again and again, as if expecting someone, as if fearing someone. Mr. Alder unfolded his napkin. Slow. Neat. Controlled. Then he pressed it. Hard. Too hard. Fingers tightening around the fabric. A silent reaction to something internal. A thought he didn't want escaping. Lydia sat near the corner. Quiet. Small. Shrinking into her chair. She kept her gaze on the soup bowl. Never at people. Never at Holt. Then Mr. Holt arrived last. He stepped in without knocking. No greeting again. He simply took his seat. Eyes sharp. Body rigid. Hands faintly stained with oil from his workshop. He didn't touch the soup. He didn't look at Mrs. Alder. He didn't glance at Mr. Alder. He watched the hallway. Only the hallway. As if something out there mattered more than anything inside this room. Miss Marple noticed. Immediately. Holt's eyes shifted every few seconds. Quick movement. Quick tension. He wasn't watching for a person. He was watching for a noise. Then it happened. Tick. A single clock somewhere in the back room jumped. A small, sharp sound. Normal to most ears. Not normal tonight. Lydia flinched. Her spoon rattled against the bowl. She looked down instantly, hoping no one noticed. But everyone noticed. Especially Holt. He turned slightly. Barely. But enough to show irritation. Miss Marple logged it mentally. Ticking. Fear. Reaction. Connection. Mr. Alder pressed the napkin again. Harder. Knuckles pale. Jaw tightening. He wasn't reacting to the sound. He was reacting to Holt. Mrs. Alder forced a smile. "It's a simple supper, Mr. Holt. I hope—" Holt cut her off with a stiff nod. He didn't soften it. He didn't apologize. His fingers tapped the table. Sharp taps. Uneven taps. Like someone replicating a clock beat. Miss Marple watched the rhythm. It didn't match any normal clock. It was the rhythm of nerves. "Busy day at the shop?" Miss Marple asked gently. Holt stiffened. "Always," he muttered. Too quick. Too defensive. He didn't want conversation. He wanted the hallway in sight. Lydia shifted in her seat, barely breathing. Mrs. Alder placed a hand over Lydia's nervously. Lydia pulled back. Quick. Fearful. Mr. Alder cleared his throat. Loud. Sharp. As if breaking tension he didn't want broken. Miss Marple didn't push further. She didn't ask more. She observed. Quietly. Deeply. She watched Holt's eyes flick to the hallway again. She watched Lydia's shoulder tremble at every tick. She watched Mr. Alder grip the napkin until it wrinkled. She watched Mrs. Alder avoid looking at her husband or Holt. The meal continued with forced calm. Forks moved, spoons clinked. No one made real conversation. Everyone guarded themselves. A soft ticking started again. Different clock. Different rhythm. Lydia froze. Holt inhaled sharply. Mr. Alder's napkin nearly tore. Miss Marple lowered her eyes for a moment, not to hide her thoughts, but to hide her certainty. She whispered in her mind. She watched, and saw what others did not. And then a sharp thud sounded from the back room. Everyone looked up at once, except Holt. He didn't look. He smiled. A small, unsettling smile, as if he already knew what had fallen. After dinner, Mrs. Alder led Miss Marple outside. No conversation, just quick breaths and quick steps. She walked with purpose, as if delaying the walk might worsen something. They reached the small lane that led to the village clock tower. Old stone, tall frame. Silent tonight. Too silent. Miss Marple looked up. The tower hands were still. No movement. No ticking. Mrs. Alder opened the side door. The restoration room waited inside. Dim. Sparse. Tools scattered in places they did not belong. "This way, Mrs. Alder," whispered. Her voice lowered again. Instinct, not politeness. Miss Marple stepped inside. The air smelled faintly of oil and dust, but not fresh dust, disturbed dust. She noticed the floor first, marked by footprints. Not many, but deep. Someone had walked here recently with weight, or in haste. Then Tom entered. The servant. Young. Sweating. Breathing too fast for such a short walk. He nodded toward Miss Marple but didn't speak. His eyes flicked from tool to tool, then to the door, then to the floor, and back again. He was searching for something, or making sure something wasn't seen. Miss Marple followed his gaze. A toolbox lay in the center of the room, not on the shelf, not under the workbench. Just in the middle, open, half-filled. "Tom," Mrs. Alder said nervously, "you didn't leave that there, did you?" Tom swallowed. "Not me, ma'am." Miss Marple studied him. He didn't sound defensive. He sounded scared. She approached the toolbox. Screwdrivers out of order, wrenches mixed sizes, clock keys scattered like they were dropped, not placed. Something had rushed through here. Someone had rummaged. Someone had needed something fast. Tom stepped back when she moved closer. His foot knocked against the leg of a wooden stool. The stool wobbled. He steadied it quickly. Too quickly. Miss Marple noted the panic in his fingers. Then footsteps echoed from outside. Slow, heavy, controlled. Mr. Holt appeared at the door. He didn't enter. He stood in the threshold, stiff as iron, eyes fixed on Miss Marple. Mrs. Alder tried to gesture him in. He didn't move. Not 1 inch. "Come in, Mr. Holt," she said quietly. "No," Holt replied. Firm. Cold. Immediate. Tom flinched. Mrs. Alder stepped back. Miss Marple said nothing. She watched Holt's shoulders. Rigid. Tense. As if stepping into the room would expose something. Or remind him of something. His eyes drifted to the toolbox. Then, quickly away. Too quickly. Miss Marple let the silence stretch. Finally, Holt muttered, "This room isn't safe at night." Then he stepped back into the lane, retreated, avoided, escaped. Mrs. Alder pressed her hand to her chest. "He never refuses to enter the tower. Never." Miss Marple turned slowly. She inspected every corner, every tool, every shadow. Then Mrs. Alder leaned close, very close. Her whisper shook. "Jane, you should look behind the old cabinet." Tom froze. His breathing stopped for a second. Miss Marple noticed. She stepped toward the cabinet. Large, dusty, heavy, 10 years unmoved from the wall. Except, she saw it. Scratches at the base. Fresh scratches, as if someone had dragged it. Recently, very recently. She placed her hand on the cabinet. It trembled under her touch. Someone, had shifted it. Miss Marple prepared to move it, but then a sharp click sounded from the other side of the room. The door closed. By itself. The door clicked shut. No wind, no draft, no hand on the handle, but it closed. Tom jumped first. A small gasp slipped from him. Then another sound followed, a softer one. A breath, from behind Miss Marple. It was Ruth, the maid. She stood in the doorway now, eyes wide, face pale. She pressed a hand to her mouth. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't move it." But Miss Marple already knew it had to be moved. Mrs. Alder trembled behind her. Tom stared at the floor. Holt had fled minutes earlier. Too many secrets, too many signs. Miss Marple placed both hands on the cabinet edge. Steady grip, quiet breath. No rush. "Tom," she said softly. "Help me, please." Tom hesitated. His eyes said no. His fear said no. But her voice left no space for refusal. He stepped forward, hands shaking. He lifted his side. The cabinet groaned. Heavy wood, old hinges, long sleep. Ruth let out a soft gasp. Not fear. Recognition. She stepped farther. Back. Hand still at her mouth. The cabinet scraped against the floor. Dust lifted in small puffs. Fresh drag marks matched perfectly with the scratches Miss Marple had seen. "Slowly," she said. Her voice stayed calm. Still. Measured. They pulled. Inches first. Then more. A narrow gap formed behind it. Too narrow for storage. Too narrow for cleaning. A gap with purpose. Tom's breathing worsened. Mrs. Alder clutched the wall. Ruth whispered something that never formed into words. Miss Marple looked into the gap. Dark. Still. Cold. She stepped closer, ignoring the dust, ignoring Tom's shaking. She looked deeper. Her eyes adjusted. The shape appeared first. A shoe. Clean. Polished. Resting neatly on the floor. Then a leg. Straight. Still. Then a hand. Hanging slightly. Palm outward. And in that palm, a small brass clock key. Miss Marple leaned closer. Her voice lowered. "Tom, pull the cabinet 1 more inch." He obeyed. Barely. The cabinet slid again. The alcove opened fully now. Ruth sobbed. Mrs. Alder stepped back until her shoulder hit the wall. There he was. Evan Reed, Lydia's missing brother, neatly dressed. Shirt pressed, coat buttoned, hair tidy, eyes closed, no wounds, no struggle. He looked asleep, peaceful, placed there, not fallen there. Miss Marple knelt beside him, calm, controlled. She examined the clock key. Clean, unused recently, held intentionally, not dropped. She checked his pulse, though she already knew. Nothing. Cold skin. Still fingers. No life. Mrs. Alder whispered. "Oh, dear heavens," Ruth cried into her apron. Tom stared, motionless, as if frozen by truth. Miss Marple rose slowly, her movements steady, logical, practiced. "Mrs. Alder," she said softly, "please fetch the inspector." Tom stepped back. Too fast, almost tripping. Miss Marple looked straight at him. Calm. Firm. "It's all right, Tom. No one is accusing you." His eyes widened. "Anyway." She glanced once more at Evan's body. No bruises. No wounds. Only placement. Careful placement. This wasn't panic. This wasn't chaos. This was arrangement. Miss Marple's gaze moved to the clock tower stairs. Something up there shifted. A faint creak. 1 step. Then silence. Someone was still inside the tower, and they had just realized. She knew. Inspector Crane arrived first. Blunt footsteps. Blunt voice. Blunt manner. He barely greeted anyone. He stepped into the tower room. Saw the alcove. Saw Evan Reed. Then grunted. "All right," he snapped. "Everyone outside. Now." Miss Marple stepped aside. Crane didn't thank her. He never did. He preferred authority over courtesy. Tom stumbled through his questions. Ruth cried through hers. Mrs. Alder kept wringing her hands. Mr. Alder gripped his cane so tightly the wood creaked. Crane moved fast. Too fast. He didn't listen, he concluded. He didn't study, he assumed. He jabbed his pen toward Mr. Alder. You knew the deceased. Mr. Alder hesitated. Just a second. But Crane seized on it. Where were you last night? Crane barked. A walk, Mr. Alder muttered. Crane's eyebrows rose. A walk? In the cold? At your age? Mr. Alder stiffened. I take evening walks. Alone? Mr. Alder's silence gave Crane what he wanted. Suspicious, Crane said loudly. Too loudly. Intended for the room to hear. Miss Marple watched. Not the words, the reactions. Mr. Alder wasn't guilty, just frightened. Of something else entirely. Before she could interrupt, Lydia slipped toward the back door. Quiet. Light steps. Trying to escape questioning. Crane caught her wrist. What are you running from? She shook her head. I wasn't. Sit. He shoved her gently toward a chair. Lydia's eyes locked on the floor. Tears formed but didn't fall. Then Holt entered. He didn't look at Evan. He didn't ask what happened. He only glared at Crane. Crane pounced. You, Holt, where were you this evening? In my shop, Holt replied flatly. Crane leaned forward. Anyone who can confirm it? No. Holt's voice didn't shake, but his jaw clenched. Crane smiled. A sharp, satisfied smile. He liked pressure. He liked making men crack. Miss Marple stepped closer. Holt, Crane said loudly, you refused to enter this room earlier. Why? Holt's gaze tightened. Not fear. Annoyance. I had work. Crane barked a laugh. At night? Holt didn't answer. Crane turned triumphantly. To me, that's suspicious. But Miss Marple watched Holt's hands, not clenched, not shaking, just careful. Someone who knew more. Someone who had seen more. Someone who didn't want to say anything around Crane. Before Crane could push further, another voice cut through the tension. Enough. Inspector Dale entered. Scotland Yard. Calm, measured, balanced. The opposite of Crane. He studied the room. One glance. One slow breath. Then he nodded at Miss Marple. Let me handle this, Dale said softly. Crane growled, but stepped back. Dale questioned each person slowly, thoughtfully. He took notes, paused between sentences, watched reactions more than words. He asked Holt again where he had been. Holt repeated his answer. Dale didn't accuse him, didn't pressure him, just wrote something down quietly. He asked Mr. Alder about his walk. Mr. Alder hesitated again, but Dale didn't push. He narrowed his eyes instead. Curious, not certain. He asked Lydia if she'd seen Evan yesterday. She shook her head, but her throat tightened first. The lie was small, barely visible, but Miss Marple saw it. So did Dale. Crane folded his arms. Alder is the obvious suspect. Means, motive, opportunity. Dale didn't agree. He didn't disagree. He simply said, obvious suspects rarely are. Miss Marple nodded. But Crane wasn't. Finished. He pointed his pen at Mr. Alder again. Hard, sharp, loud. Until I see otherwise, he is my man. Mrs. Alder gasped. Lydia covered her mouth. Tom backed into the wall. Mr. Alder's cane shook slightly. Miss Marple looked at Crane, then at the alcove, then at Holt, then at Lydia. Then she whispered, No, the wrong man is being trapped. Crane turned. What did you say? Miss Marple didn't answer yet, because something moved above them, high in the tower, a soft scrape, a faint shift. Dale heard it too. He looked up the stairs. Someone else was still inside the tower, someone who didn't want to come down. The tower room fell quiet, too quiet. Inspector Crane muttered to himself. Inspector Dale took notes. Tom sat on a stool, barely breathing. Lydia stared at the floor. Mrs. Alder stood near the wall, trembling. Mr. Alder pressed both hands on his cane. Miss Marple stepped aside. She needed space to think. Small steps. Slow steps. Her eyes moved from one corner to another. No rush, no drama, just quiet logic. She began listing the irregularities. Soft voice, even tone. Only Dale leaned in. Crane did not. "First," she said gently, "the back door." Mrs. Alder flinched. "It was unlocked," Marple continued. "No one admits to opening it, but someone did." She raised one finger. Simple, clear. Second, the muddy scarf. She looked at Lydia. Lydia's shoulders tightened. Just slightly. Not guilt. Fear. "Someone went out last night," Miss Marple said. "No doubt about that." Another finger lifted. Third, the missing clock key. Tom glanced toward the toolbox. Miss Marple noticed. She always noticed. "It reappeared in Evan Reed's hand," she said, "which means it was taken, then returned." She paused. "Returned after he died." Crane snorted. "Or he took it himself." Miss Marple shook her head once, calmly. "No, he wasn't repairing anything, and the way he held it was staged, placed deliberately." Dale nodded slowly. He saw it too. Miss Marple lifted another finger. Fourth, the smell of tobacco. She looked at the pantry door. Still closed. Still holding secrets. "No one here smokes," she continued, "but the smell drifted in, faint but clear. Someone brought it in on their clothing." Crane folded his arms. "Plenty of villagers smoke." "Yes," Miss Marple replied softly, "but only one entered the house at the right time." She didn't reveal the name yet. Not enough pieces in place. Not yet. Finally, she raised her last finger. Fifth. Lydia trembling. Everyone turned to Lydia. Too quickly. Too sharply. She sank deeper into her chair. Miss Marple walked closer. Slow. Gentle. "Lydia isn't trembling because she harmed him," she said. "She's trembling because she knows something. Something she fears saying." Lydia covered her mouth. Tears threatened, but didn't fall. Crane scoffed. "Or she's guilty." Miss Marple shook her head again. Still calm. Still steady. "No. Her fear points elsewhere. Not inward." She turned toward the group. Her voice stayed soft, but the weight of her words shifted the room. "These irregularities do not point to a single moment. They point to preparation." Dale leaned forward. "Preparation for what?" Miss Marple answered clearly. "Someone planned this." The statement settled into the air. Heavy. Unwelcome. True. Mrs. Alder gripped her chest. Tom stared at the floor. "Mr." Alder let out a slow breath he had been holding. Lydia covered her ears, as if the truth itself hurt. Crane paced. "Planned? By who? Who in this house has that kind of nerve?" Miss Marple didn't answer him. Not yet. She looked at Dale, then at the staircase leading upward, the place where the scraping sound had come from. "The person who planned this," she said softly, "is the same person who hasn't come down." Dale stiffened. Crane turned toward the stairs. Tom stepped back. Lydia hid behind her hands. A faint tap echoed above them. One step, then silence. Miss Marple whispered, "They're still here." Miss Marple left the clock tower with Inspector Dale. They agreed on one thing. More information was needed. Quiet information. Village information. And villages always had it. She walked to the vicarage. Calm steps. Even breath. Her mind sorting facts. Placing each irregularity in its box. The vicar's wife opened the door. Warm smile. Tense eyes. "Miss Marple, you've heard, I suppose?" Miss Marple nodded. "Only pieces," she said softly. The vicar's wife ushered her in. Two neighbor ladies were already seated. Mrs. Bell and Mrs. Winton. Both eager, both alarmed, both overflowing with stories. The kettle hissed. Cups clinked. Then Mrs. Bell leaned forward. Voice lowered. Tone urgent. "You should know. A stranger was. Seen at the Aldergate last night," she whispered. "A tall man. Long coat. Didn't speak. Just stood there." Miss Marple nodded. She didn't interrupt. She didn't react strongly. She let the words settle. Mrs. Winton added her part quickly. And someone was lurking near the train station at dusk. Didn't board, didn't leave, just watched the road. Did they look like the same person? Miss Marple asked gently. Both ladies exchanged glances, meaningful glances. They weren't certain, but they suspected. Yes. Miss Marple noted it. Then Mrs. Bell leaned even closer. You know the clock tower. We hear strange noises from it at night. Not repairs. Not normal sounds. What kind of noises? Miss Marple asked. Dragging, Mrs. Bell whispered. Something heavy. Sometimes steps. Sometimes tapping. Mrs. Winton nodded. I heard it too. My window faces the tower. Dragging. Heavy movement. Matches the cabinet. Matches the alcove. Miss Marple's mind tightened around the pieces. Then Mrs. Bell delivered the next piece. I saw Tom yesterday, she said, arguing with Holt, loud, in the lane by the workshop. Miss Marple blinked once. Arguing? Oh, yes, Mrs. Winton added quickly. Tom looked terrified. Holt looked furious. A new connection, fear and anger in the same moment. But not necessarily over Evan. Miss Marple asked softly, Did they touch each other? No, Mrs. Bell said. Holt just waved something at him. Something? Miss Marple asked. A button, Mrs. Bell replied. A coat button, torn clean off. He held it up like a warning. Miss Marple paused. A torn button. A quiet argument. Fear in Tom's face. Mrs. Winton leaned forward again. And there's more. Someone saw a small wooden box being carried out of Holt's shop late last night. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. A box? What kind? Square, Mrs. Winton said. Clockmaker's size. Just big enough for tools. Or parts. Or something else. Miss Marple breathed slowly. A tall stranger at the gate. A lurker at the station. Noises from the tower. Tom arguing with Holt. A torn coat button. A wooden box carried after dark. All pieces. All leading somewhere. But not to the person Crane insisted on. These pointed elsewhere. Miss Marple stood. The ladies waited eagerly for her reaction. She only smiled politely. Thank you, she said. You've both been very helpful. The vicar's wife walked her to the door. Soft voice. Worried eyes. Miss Marple, what does all of this mean? Miss Marple stepped outside. Cold air brushed her cheek. She looked toward the clock tower. Silent again. Watching the village. It means, she said softly, someone has been moving in the dark. A carriage creaked in the lane. Someone inside ducked down. Hiding. Watching her. Miss Marple noticed instantly. She walked forward one step. The carriage wheels scraped, then rolled backward, retreating. Someone was avoiding her. Someone who didn't want her collecting any more gossip. Miss Marple returned to the Alder cottage just before dusk. The door opened before she could knock. Ruth stood there, eyes red, hands tight around her apron. Miss Marple, may I speak with you? Her voice trembled. Her breath shook. Miss Marple nodded gently. Ruth stepped aside, closed the door behind them, shoulders stiff, fear close to the surface. They entered the sitting room. Mrs. Alder sat with her hands clasped. Mr. Alder stared at nothing. Tom hovered near the wall. Lydia stood by the staircase, pale and worn. Ruth swallowed. Twice. Then spoke. I need to tell you something. She looked at Mrs. Alder first, then at Miss Marple. I found the back door open at midnight. Mrs. Alder gasped. You told me it was locked. I know, Ruth whispered. I couldn't say it then. I was. Scared. Her voice cracked. I heard a noise. A soft one. I went to check. And the door? It was open. Miss Marple asked softly. Did you see anyone? Ruth shook her head. No. But the cold air rushed in, and something felt wrong. Miss Marple nodded slowly. She had expected this. The back door had not been an accident. Then she turned to Tom. He looked cornered already. His chest tightened with every breath. Tom, she said quietly, you have something to say as well. Tom looked down, then up, then down again, I misplaced the tower key, he whispered. I didn't want to admit it. I was ashamed. Miss Marple didn't scold him. She simply asked, "When did you lose it?" "Yesterday afternoon," Tom replied. "I had it in my coat pocket. It must have fallen. I searched everywhere. I couldn't find it." "Did you tell Mr. Holt?" she asked. Tom's throat tightened. "No." Miss Marple watched him carefully. His fear wasn't guilt. It was something else. Someone else. Mrs. Alder covered her mouth in shock. That key. Anyone could have used it. "Yes," Miss Marple said softly. "Anyone." The room fell silent. Then Lydia spoke. Quietly, shakily. "I need to correct something." All eyes turned to her. Her hands trembled. Her voice barely held itself together. "I said I didn't go out last night," she whispered. "I lied." Mrs. Alder gasped again. Mr. Alder closed his eyes. Tom nearly dropped the tool he was holding. Miss Marple stepped closer. Her voice stayed calm. "Where did you go, Lydia?" Lydia swallowed hard. "I wasn't meeting anyone," she said quickly. "And I didn't see Evan. I swear it." "Then why leave the house?" Miss Marple asked softly. Lydia hesitated. Her fingers dug into her sleeves. Tears formed. "I heard something," she whispered. "Outside. By the tower." She looked toward the window. Fear filled her eyes. "I thought it was Evan. I thought he'd come home." Miss Marple held her gaze. "And what did you see?" Lydia shook her head. I can't say. I'm not sure. It was dark." Her voice fell to a whisper. "But someone was there." Miss Marple felt the room tighten. Every piece was aligning now. The back door, the missing key, the scarf, the smell, the window, the movement in the tower, the lies told out of fear, a deeper truth forming, a pattern taking shape. She looked at Mr. Alder, then Tom, then Lydia. Then she said nothing, because something outside the window moved. A shadow, quick, low, watching. Miss Marple saw it first. Someone was listening. Someone who had no intention of letting the truth stay inside this room. The room stayed heavy after Lydia's confession. Each person held a piece of truth. Each person feared the full shape of it. Miss Marple remained calm. She always did. She stood near the mantel, hands folded, voice steady. "It is time," she said softly, "to consider motives." Tom looked away. Lydia froze. Mrs. Alder whispered a prayer under her breath. Mr. Alder gripped his cane again. And Holt. Holt had just stepped into the doorway. He didn't speak. He didn't sit. He didn't blink much either. Miss Marple began with the simplest thread. Evan Reed was investigating inheritance papers. Lydia's face tightened instantly. Miss Marple continued. His father left something disputed, something that required proof. Evan wanted that proof. Tom swallowed hard. He knew this part. So did Lydia. Miss Marple looked at Lydia gently. "Your brother wanted you protected. That much is clear." Lydia nodded once. Slow, painful. Miss Marple shifted to the next thread. "Holt," she said softly, "feared exposure of old wrongdoing." Holt jolted, just slightly. His fingers twitched. A small giveaway. Miss Marple didn't accuse him. She simply stated the logic. Evan knew. Something, she said. Something from Holt's past. Something Holt wished forgotten. Holt's jaw clenched. His eyes darkened. He took a slow breath. Crane would have shouted. Dale would have pressed. Miss Marple did neither. She let Holt react. Reactions always spoke louder. Then she turned to Mr. Alder. "And you," she added quietly, "owed Evan money." "Mrs." Alder gasped. Mr. Alder closed his eyes. His cane trembled once. He didn't deny it. He didn't argue. He just looked away. "Why did you not tell the inspector?" Miss Marple asked. "Because it had nothing to do with his death," he snapped weakly. "I intended to repay him. But you were afraid the debt made you look guilty." Mr. Alder didn't answer. His silence said enough. Miss Marple nodded slowly. The shapes were forming. Not one motive. Several. Interlocking. Overlapping. She turned to Lydia last. "Lydia," she said gently, "you hide shame. Shame about Evan confronting someone you didn't want named. Tears filled Lydia's eyes immediately. He wasn't angry, she whispered. He was trying to protect me. Her voice broke. I didn't want people talking. Miss Marple gave a small nod. She knew the truth now. Lydia had heard the confrontation. Lydia had seen more than she admitted. Lydia had recognized the voice in the dark. The room sensed it too. The tension rose. Tight. Close. Almost unbearable. Then Holt cracked. He stepped forward too suddenly. Too sharply. Enough, he snapped. No more guessing. No more hints. His voice wasn't anger. It was fear wrapped in control. Fear that the next sentence would expose him. Fear that someone would say his name. Mrs. Alder backed away. Tom stepped behind the chair. Lydia hugged her arms. Mr. Alder closed his hand over his cane top, white-knuckled. Holt's breath shook. He pointed at Tom. At Lydia. At Mr. Alder. At anyone except Miss Marple. You don't know anything, he hissed. Miss Marple lifted her chin, calm, steady, watching him unravel. Holt, she said softly, your panic is showing. He froze, his face drained. He looked toward the clock tower window. One quick glance, one instinctive check. Miss Marple saw it. Someone was there, upstairs, waiting for Holt's signal, or watching his reaction. She followed Holt's eyes, just in time to see a shadow pull back from the glass. Miss Marple did not confront Holt immediately. Not yet. Holt was too alert, too reactive, too ready to hide anything she asked about. She waited for the right moment. It came when Crane dragged Holt back toward the cottage for more questions. Holt protested. Crane ignored him. Dale followed to keep Crane from ruining the case. That left Holt's shop unattended. Miss Marple slipped inside. Quiet, measured, every step precise. The workshop smelled of oil and metal. Tools hung neatly. Benches lined the walls. Nothing looked out of place, which meant something was. Miss Marple scanned the shelves. Boxes, brass gears, clock faces, tiny screws in glass jars. Her eyes paused on a narrow cabinet. The drawer spacing looked wrong. One drawer sat slightly deeper than the others. Not by mistake, not by age, by design. She pulled the drawer gently. It slid out only halfway. Stopped, blocked, a hidden catch. Old craftsmen liked secrets. Miss Marple pressed the underside. Nothing. She tapped the back panel. A hollow sound. A clue. She pressed the left side this time. A soft click answered her. The drawer slid fully open. Inside lay 4 items, each one dangerous in its own way. First, Evan's small notebook. His handwriting neat, organized, determined. Second, a train ticket. One way. Dated yesterday evening. Departure time late. Destination unclear from the tear on the edge. Third, a photograph. Small, black and white. Holt and Evan in the frame. Not standing together, arguing. Holt's hand raised, Evan leaning back. The tension unmistakable. Fourth, a torn scrap of fabric. Dark wool, frayed edge. A perfect match to the missing coat button Mrs. Bell had described. Miss Marple laid them out carefully. No rush, no emotion, just logic. Evan had confronted Holt. Holt had tried to hide the proof. Tom's fear made sense now. Lydia's trembling made sense. The wooden box someone carried from Holt's shop made sense. But one detail stood out. More than the rest. More than the ticket. More than the photograph. Inside Evan's notebook, on the margin of a page, a single name was written. Pressed hard. Underlined once. A warning, or a revelation. Alder. Miss Marple stared at the name. Not shocked by the word itself. Shocked by the way it was written. The force, the pressure, as if Evan wrote it in urgency, or fear, or both. But which Alder? Mr. Alder? Mrs. Alder? Someone hidden behind their name? A relative? A partner? A debt collector? A secret connection? Miss Marple folded the notebook again. Very carefully. She placed the items back exactly as she'd found them. Position precise. Edges aligned. Drawer closed gently. She wiped a faint spot of dust from her glove, then stepped out of the shop. The lane was quiet. Too quiet. She looked toward the cottage. Mrs. Alder stood in the doorway, not moving, not blinking, just staring at Miss Marple. Her expression was unreadable. Not fear, not grief, not anger. Something else, something deeper. Miss Marple stepped forward. Mrs. Alder whispered across the distance, "You shouldn't have gone in there." Before Miss Marple could reply, a shadow moved behind Mrs. Alder. Slow, heavy, deliberate. Someone else was in the cottage, someone who had been waiting for her return. Miss Marple asked for a moment alone. Mrs. Alder agreed quickly. Too quickly. The others drifted to the kitchen. Doors clicked. Whispers faded. Miss Marple sat in the small sitting room. Straight-back chair. Hands folded. Eyes lowered. Breath calm. She reviewed the day. Piece by piece. Clue by clue. The back door open. The muddy scarf. The misplaced key. The cigarette smell. The wooden box. The torn button. The strange noises. The hidden drawer in Holt's shop. Evan's notebook. The name, Alder. All scattered, but not random. Not anymore. She began with the clocks. Always the clocks. The village was full of them. Too many. Ticking out of rhythm. Ticking off time. Ticking wrong. The mantel clock 20 minutes slow. The hallway clock 5 minutes fast. The tower clock silent at the wrong hour. Someone had controlled them. Shifted them. Manipulated them. Miss Marple whispered, "Why change time? Not to confuse a visitor. Not to fool the inspector. But to mislead one person specifically. Evan. He had come to the tower. He thought he came at one time. He arrived at another. Someone guided him. Someone who knew he followed clocks. Someone who knew he trusted mechanical truth." She looked toward the kitchen. Voices murmured, nervous, tangled. She returned to the pattern. Footsteps in the tower, dragging sounds. Cabinet moved quietly. Body placed with care. Clothes straightened. Key positioned in his hand. Not panic, not struggle. Control. Someone who worked with mechanisms. Someone who knew gears. Someone who understood how to stop a clock without leaving a trace. And someone who knew the tower well. She thought of Holt. Yes, he had skill. Yes, he had motive. Yes, he had fear. But something was wrong with that picture. Holt was clumsy in deception. Too loud. Too reactive. Too exposed. The person who moved the cabinet had strength. But not brute strength. Purposeful strength. Practiced movements. Careful placement. Not Holt. Miss Marple moved to the next thread. Who would Evan trust enough to meet quietly? Who could tell him a time to come? Who could stand close without alarming him? Someone familiar. Someone older. Someone respected. She thought of Mrs. Alder, her tremors, her fear, her glances at the tower, her habit of looking behind her mid-sentence. But Mrs. Alder did not know clocks. She could not silence them. Miss Marple turned to Mr. Alder. Quiet man, stiff posture, debt to Evan. Late-night walks, defensive cane-tapping. A man who hid more than he admitted, but one detail sharpened in her mind. A detail she had nearly dismissed. The tower clocks had been silenced smoothly. Without damage, without jamming, without forcing gears. It required finesse, precision, skill. Only one person in Hawthorne Edge had that. Only one person with the expertise. Only one person with regular access to the tower. Only one person who could move through the building unnoticed. Miss Marple exhaled. Quiet. Resolute. She whispered the truth aloud. It was the clockmaker. But that wasn't the end. The motive was deeper, the reason darker. The name Alder written in Evan's notebook made everything sharper. Holt hadn't acted alone. Someone stood behind him. Someone Holt feared more than exposure. Someone Holt would protect at any cost. Miss Marple rose slowly, because she finally knew who Evan met at the tower, and she finally knew who placed his body in the alcove. A floorboard creaked behind her. Someone else knew she knew. The drawing room felt tight, chairs arranged in a half circle, faces pale, breaths uneven. Inspector Crane paced. Inspector Dale waited. Holt stood near the window, stiff as a board. Lydia sat trembling. Tom kept his hands behind his back. Mr. and Mrs. Alder stayed close together. Miss Marple entered quietly. No rush. No flourish. "Thank you," she said softly. "I will be brief." Crane scoffed. Dale nodded. Holt looked away. Miss Marple began. Evan Reed discovered something. Her eyes moved from face to face. He discovered Holt had been forging repair bills. Holt jerked. His shoulders tightened. He stared harder out the window. Miss Marple continued. Evan visited the tower. He kept notes. Dates. Times. Charges. Holt used old invoices. Copied signatures. Claimed repairs never done. Evan noticed the discrepancies. Tom swallowed hard. Mr. Alder blinked slowly. Mrs. Alder whispered, "Oh, dear." Miss Marple raised a hand. Calm. Clear. Evan confronted Holt. Not violently, not angrily, but firmly. Evan threatened to report him. Lydia covered her mouth. Tears gathered. Miss Marple added, Holt panicked. He feared exposure. He feared losing everything. And he feared someone else learning the truth. Holt stepped back. The window frame caught his hand. Miss Marple didn't pause. He lured Evan to the tower with the wrong time. He silenced the tower clock so Evan would think it was earlier. Holt met him in the dark. Inspector Dale leaned forward. And then? Holt struck him, Miss Marple said quietly. Not with force, not with a weapon. Evan fell. The shock, the angle. It was enough. Lydia sobbed. Tom lowered his head. Mr. Alder shook. Miss Marple continued. Holt dragged the body, slowly, carefully. He moved the cabinet, created the alcove scene, straightened Evan's clothes, placed the clock key in his hand. Crane barked. Staged. Miss Marple nodded. Yes, completely. She turned to Lydia. You lied only to protect your brother's reputation. You feared people would assume scandal or wrongdoing. You heard the confrontation. You recognized Holt's voice, but you couldn't bring yourself to say it. Lydia cried harder. Evan wasn't doing anything wrong, she whispered. I just didn't want them to twist it. Miss Marple's voice remained kind. I know, my dear. Then she faced Mr. Alder. You were framed, she said simply. Holt planted the torn button behind your shed. He assumed the debt you owed Evan would make you appear desperate. A convenient suspect. Mr. Alder's shoulders sagged. He closed his eyes, relieved and shaken. Miss Marple returned to Holt. You planned to mislead the inspectors. You hoped the clocks would confuse the timeline. But only one person here knows how to silence them correctly. Holt clenched the window ledge, his breath sharp, his eyes darting. Inspector Dale stepped forward. Holt, he said, do you wish to respond? Holt didn't speak, didn't blink, didn't breathe for a moment. Miss Marple finished gently. Evan trusted you. That was his mistake. Silence, heavy, final. Then Holt broke. A sharp inhale, a stumble backward, a muttered, I didn't mean. Crane grabbed his arm. Dale cuffed him. Ruth gasped. Lydia sobbed again. Holt sagged under the weight of truth. But before he was taken out, Holt looked at Miss Marple. A strange look, a warning buried inside it. And he whispered, You got me, but you didn't get the other one. Miss Marple froze. The room fell still. The village settled slowly. Not at once. Not in a rush. Hawthorne Edge simply breathed again, room by room, lane by lane, clock by clock. The tension that had hovered for days loosened, softening like steam in cool air. Lydia sat at the small kitchen table, a cup of tea in her hands. Her eyes still red, but lighter now. She looked at Miss Marple with quiet gratitude. I can rest tonight, she whispered. It won't bring Evan back, but at least I know the truth. Miss Marple nodded gently. She never hurried comfort. She let it arrive in its own time. Mrs. Alder placed another pot of tea on the table, her hand steadier than before, her voice softer than any moment that week. "I'm so sorry," she said, "for the worry, for the confusion, for the fear." She looked from Lydia to Miss Marple. "I should have spoken sooner. I felt something was wrong. I simply didn't know what to do." "Fear often silences good people," Miss Marple said quietly. "It is nothing to be ashamed of." Mr. Alder shuffled into the room, leaning on his cane. He gave Lydia a small nod, respectful, humbled. His debt to Evan was still real, but so was his relief at being cleared. Tom brought in biscuits. Awkward, hopeful, grateful that no fingers pointed at him now. Miss Marple poured herself a fresh cup. Small sip, warm breath. Her eyes drifted to the window where the tower stood, peaceful once more. "Truth," she said softly, "has a way of finding daylight, even when people try to hide it, even when fear tries to bury it." Lydia nodded. Mrs. Alder dabbed her eyes. The house felt gentler. Miss Marple looked into her cup. "Fear clouds judgment," she murmured. "But conscience always remains. And that brings tonight's mystery to a gentle close. Thank you for listening. Truly. I'm always grateful you spend your quiet moments here with us on the curious case. Before you go, tell me, which clue caught your attention tonight, and where are you listening from? Your answers mean more than you know. If you enjoyed this cozy tale, I hope you'll join me again tomorrow. There's always another secret waiting, another whisper in the village, another truth ready to be found. Until then, tomorrow, another kettle will boil. A single pocket watch ticks on the table. Its steady beat fills the quiet room. Beside it lies a folded note, edges softened by handling. A dim cottage window glows in the background, warm and gentle against the night. Near the sill, a cup sits cooling beside a small bundle of knitting, needles resting peacefully. No movement, no voices. Just the soft hush of a village settling once more. A slow, steady fade into quiet. Davis returns in a whisper. A quiet truth found its way home tonight. The village rests. The clock tower keeps steady time. Once more. Windows dim. Footsteps fade. Only calm remains. He leaves listeners with one gentle promise, a final breath of warmth. Good night, until the next mystery calls.